Hi guys, Mariam here with English Free Shop. Today I want to talk about simple present. First, I'm going to discuss when we use simple present. Then I'm going to explain how to use it. I'll give you some examples with affirmative, negative, and questions. Then I'm going to talk about have, has, and their difference with have got and has got. Then I'll provide more examples. And at the end, we'll go through adverbs of frequency, which are mainly used with simple present. So without further delay, let's get started. Okay, when do we use simple present? We use simple present to talk about our routines and our habits, things that we do regularly, like every day, every month, every week. For example, I take a shower every morning, or I go to work by bus. This is something that I usually do, I do regularly, okay? So, to talk about permanent situations or the things that are always true. For example, my parents own a house in the countryside. My parents always have this house in the countryside. It's not a permanent, it's not a temporary situation. It's a permanent situation that is true at least for a long period of time or forever, okay? So to talk about facts or generally accepted truth, such as scientific facts. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. This is a scientific fact. At the end, we use simple present to tell stories or talk about books or movies. How do we use simple present? If the pronouns are I, you, we, and they, we use a simple form of the verb after the subjects. For example, I eat lunch. My cousins live in New York. They live in New York. We walk to school. My sister and I walk to school. You read very well. You do your homework every day. You have an English class at 5 o'clock. If the subjects are she, he, and it, we add one S at the end of the verbs. For example, she eats an ice cream. Rosie eats ice cream. He lives in a big city. My brother lives in a big city. It sleeps on the floor, or my cat sleeps on the floor. We can use subject pronouns or we can use any names, proper nouns for subjects. It doesn't matter. It means that if we are talking about he or she or it, one person or one thing, we add one S at the end of the verbs. Okay? So, if the verbs end in S, Z, X, CH, SH, G, and O. Instead of S, we add ES. And of course, the pronunciation also changes a little bit. For example, she teaches English. I teach English. She teaches English. We add ES and the pronunciation becomes is. Teaches English. She watches TV at night. Another spelling rule for simple present for when we have she or he or it is when we have y at the end of the verb. Of course, if we have consonant before y, this rule is true only if we have consonant before y. So in this case, the y changes to I and then we add es. For example, study changes to studies. Y changes to I and then we add es. But if we have a vowel before y, we don't change anything. We just add s like the normal verbs. Okay, so it depends on what we have before y. If it is a vowel, it doesn't change. If it is a consonant, it means consonant is any letter in the alphabet that is not a vowel and it's not W and Y. So except W, Y, and vowels, if we have any other kind of letters in the alphabet that comes before Y, the Y changes to I and then we add ES. So these are some spelling rules. Okay, how can we ask questions and change sentences into negative forms in simple present? In this case, when we want to ask question or make a negative sentence, we use an auxiliary verb. What is an auxiliary verb? Auxiliary verb is actually a helping verb that helps us to change the sentences into questions and negative forms. So in this case, for simple present, we have two auxiliary verbs, which are do and does. So if the subject pronouns are I, you, we, and they, we use the auxiliary verb do or don't. Actually, don't is the short form for do not. Okay? For example, do you live in New York City? Yes, I do. No, I don't. So, first we have the sentence. Imagine the positive sentence is you live in New York City. When we want to change it to question, the only thing that we do is that we put do at the beginning of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence doesn't change. You live in New York City. Do you live in New York City? So the only thing that we do is to put do at the beginning of the sentence. And then we have two kinds of answers. We can just answer with the short answer. In this case, again, we use auxiliary verb. We say, yes, I do. I live in New York City. No, I don't. I don't live in New York City. So for the short answers, we use again the auxiliary verb, yes, I do, or no, I don't. For the affirmative sentence, we don't change anything. I live in New York City. Or if we want to change it to negative, the only thing that we do is that we put don't before the verb or between the verb and the subject. I don't live in New York. Okay? So if we have she, he, or it, in this case, instead of do, we use the auxiliary verb doesn't. So she reads well. When we want to change it to question, we must do two things. The first thing is that we must remove the S from the end of the verb. So reads becomes read. And then we put does at the beginning of the sentence. Does she read well? Yes, she does. Or no, she doesn't. These are the short answers. So remember that it is important to know that when we have does or do or any kind of auxiliary verb, always after auxiliary verbs, the verb comes in the simple form. So it means that we mustn't put S when we have does. So does she read? Not does she reads. This is wrong. Does she read well? We remove the S and then we add does at the beginning to make a question sentence. For negative, we put doesn't before the verb, and of course we remove S from the end of the verb. So it becomes she doesn't read well. She reads well. She doesn't read well. So you have to remember that. This is very important, that after does, when we have does, the verb comes in the simple form of it, and we don't put S at the end of it anymore. Okay? So how do we make WH questions? Because sometimes, okay, we have two forms of sentences of questions in English. One of them is yes and no questions, which in this case, in simple present case, it starts with do or does, or it can also start with to be if we have to be. And another type of the question is when we have WH questions, the question words that start with WH, like what, where, when, who, how, why, which, whom, how much, how many. Of course, we have more, but for now, these WH questions are the most important ones. Okay, so what do we do in this case when we have WH questions? That's really simple. The only thing that we do is that we put WH questions at the beginning of the question form, question sentence. We put it at the beginning of the question sentence. For example, do you live in Paris? So if I want to ask this with where, of course I should omit in Paris because this is our answer. So I omit the answer, or I remove the answer. So I have do you live. The only thing is that I put where at the beginning. Where do you live? Does she work in the zoo? So I want to say where. I want to ask where. So I must omit the answer, which is in the zoo. Does she work? Where does she work? Do they have 3 children? So I remove 3 children because that is actually my answer. Do they have? How many children do they have? Remember, when we have how many, or sometimes when we have which, we need to say actually what. So after how many, how much sometimes, and which, we must put a noun after them because we want to say how many what? How many books, how many children, how many cars, how many houses. We don't know, so we have to mention that. So how many children, and then we put the auxiliary verb do you have. Okay, how many children do you have? I cannot say how many do you have because then the listener would ask how many what are you asking me about. So I have to mention. So remember, after how many, how much, which, we have a noun. Okay, and then after that we have the rest of the question sentence. Do you get up at 7 o'clock? We remove at 7 o'clock. Do you get up? What time do you get up? Okay, does she have English on Mondays? So I want to ask when. Of course I have to take out on Mondays because it's the answer. Does she have English? When does she have English? Okay, let's give you more examples for affirmative and negative sentences. My dad drives me to school. My dad doesn't drive me to school. Question: does my dad drive me to school? Robin does his homework. Robin doesn't do his homework. Does Robin do his homework? Remember that do and does can be both auxiliary verb and the main verb. Here, does, actually Robin does his homework in the affirmative sentence. Actually does is the main verb. It's the action verb of the sentence. But for the next sentence, which is a negative one, Robin doesn't do his homework. Doesn't is the auxiliary verb to make the sentence negative, and then the do that comes after doesn't is actually the main verb. Okay, the same goes for the question sentence. Does Robin do his homework? Does auxiliary verb and do the main verb. Okay, you listen to music every night. You don't listen to music every night. Do you listen to music every night? My husband works at a hospital. My husband doesn't work at a hospital. Does your husband work at a hospital? Okay, so have and has are a little different because they have two different verbs. Have is a kind of irregular verb, even when it comes to the simple present, because we usually don't have irregular verbs in simple present. The only one is have and has. So for have and has, if the subject is I, you, we, they, we use have. I have a house in the countryside. They have a beautiful garden. So this question and negative is the same as the normal verbs. Do they have a beautiful garden? Yes, they do. They have a beautiful garden. No, they don't. They don't have a beautiful garden. Now, if we have he, she, or it, we use has. She has a cat. My cat has 3 kittens. Okay, so does she have a cat? So again, like normal verbs, we use does. Does she have a cat? Yes, she does. She has a cat. No, she doesn't. She doesn't have a cat. Remember again here, I mention again, because we have does, after does we must use simple form of the verb, and simple form of the verb has actually is have. So, and what about have got and has got? We have got and has got have the same meaning as have and has, but mostly we use have got and has got in the informal and speaking form. Okay, and we use have for the formal and writing forms. Okay, the only thing is that when we have got and has got, we don't use the auxiliary verb do or does to change the sentences into question or negative. We use have. So the sentences would be like that. Have you got a pet? Have you got a pet? Yes, I have. I've got a pet. No, I haven't. I haven't got a pet. So we add not to have. I haven't got a pet. I've got a pet, which is actually the short form for I have got a pet. Okay? Has got the same. Has she got a pet? Yes, she has. She's got a pet. Here, she's got actually is the short form for she has got. It doesn't have to do with to be. Okay? Consider that. No, she hasn't. She hasn't got a pet. Hasn't actually is the negative for has not, is the short form for has got. In this case, we are not using do or does. When we have has got, when we have got, we use just have to make them question or negative. Okay? So I give you some more examples. She has two brothers, or she's got two brothers. You have an expensive car. You've got an expensive car. I have a camera. I've got a camera. She doesn't have a laptop. She hasn't got a laptop. They don't have any children. They haven't got any children. Do you have any money? Have you got any money? Does she have a sister? Has she got a sister? Okay, now let me give you some example with a text. Let's practice a little bit asking questions and make negative and positive sentences in simple present. Okay, first let's read this text together. My name is Sarah. I come from Italy and I live in an apartment in the center of Milan. I live with my friend Jenny. I'm a teacher. I teach math and science. Jenny is a teacher too. She is my coworker and we work at the same high school. We get up early at 5:30 every morning. We go to work by train. We work for 6 hours a day. We usually have lunch at school. We have lunch at 1 o'clock. I finish work at 3 o'clock and I get home at 4:30. I love my job because I love children. At the weekend, I read books and visit my friends. We usually go out for a meal on Saturday nights. Milan is an interesting city. There is always something nice to do. Okay, let's try to make some sentences from the beginning. For example, my name is Sarah. What kind of question I can ask for this? I can say, what is your name? Or in this case, imagine I'm talking about another person. I say, what is her name? I come from Italy. Where do you come from? I live in an apartment in the center of Milan. Where do you live? Or I can say, do you live in an apartment? Do you live in the center of Milan? I live with my friend Jenny. Who do you live with? Do you live with your friend Jenny? Do you live with your parents? I'm a teacher. What's your job? Or what do you do? Remember, when someone asks you, what's your job or what do you do? You must answer with I am. Okay, you can't say my job is a teacher. It is wrong. You must say I'm a teacher. Or if I ask you, for example, what is your husband's job? What is your girlfriend's job? What is your father's job? You cannot say her job, or sorry, his job is this. You must say he's an engineer. She's a doctor. Remember that, okay? I teach math and science. What do you teach? Jenny is a teacher too. What is Jenny's job? What does Jenny do? Both of them have the same meaning. What does she do, or what is her job? She is my coworker. Is she your coworker? And we work at the same high school. Do you work at the same high school? We get up early at 5:30 every morning. What time do you get up? We go to work by train. How do you go to work? We work for 6 hours a day. How many hours a day do you work? We usually have lunch at school. Do you have lunch at school, or do you have lunch at home? No, we don't. We don't have lunch at home. Okay? We have lunch at 1 o'clock. What time do you have lunch? Okay, let's go to the next slide, because in the next slide I have written some more examples. Okay, in this case I'm talking about Sarah as a third person. Okay, where does she come from? She comes from Milan. What is her job? What does she do? She's a teacher. I explained about that. What is her job? What does she do? Both have the same meaning to ask about someone's job. And in the answer, we always use subject plus the verb to be. Okay? Does she teach English? No, she doesn't. She teaches math and science. And who does she live with? She lives with her friend Jenny. Do they get up late? No, they don't. They don't get up late. How does she go to work? She goes to work by train. How do they go to work? They go to work by train. What time do they have lunch? They have lunch at 1 o'clock. What does she do at the weekend? She goes out with her friends. Why does she love her job? Because she loves children. So here are some examples that I made, some sentences, some questions, and some negative and affirmative sentences. If you want to practice more, you can make your own questions and write them in the comment section, or you can make negative sentences write them in the comment section. I will check all of them. Okay. Let's talk about the adverbs of frequency. So adverbs of frequency are usually used with the simple present tense. They show and they talk about how often we do something. For example, I always go to work by bus. I sometimes watch TV at night. Okay, always, usually, often, sometimes, seldom, never, etc. All the kind of adverbs that show how often we do something. The important thing is the place that we use them in the sentence. We usually use them before the main verb. For example, I always have breakfast at 9 o'clock. But I said we usually. Sometimes for some adverbs of frequency, especially for sometimes, it is a little tricky, and it can come at the beginning and it also can come at the end. Some of other adverbs of frequency are like this too. They can come at the beginning or at the end too. But just remember that the best place for them is before the verb. Sometimes I go to bed late. I sometimes go to bed late. Okay? But remember, if we have the verb to be, the adverbs of frequency come after to be. For example, she is always hungry. We cannot say she always is hungry. It is wrong. So for to be, remember that the adverbs of frequency come after to be. She is always hungry. I am always happy, and so on. Okay? So I hope this lesson was useful for you and you liked it and enjoyed it. So don't forget to write for me in the comments. You can make any kind of sentences that you want in the comments. You can make questions in simple present. You can make negative sentences or affirmative sentences. I will check and I will read all your comments. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I see you next session. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves.